My name is Justine, I'm 35 years old, and 3 months ago I watched my entire family celebrate what they thought was my financial ruin. They had no idea I was about to serve them the most devastating revenge of their lives. But before I tell you how I completely destroyed my brother's plans and left my family speechless, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever fantasized about getting perfect revenge on someone who betrayed you. If you've ever had a family member try to steal what's rightfully yours, or if you've ever been underestimated by the people closest to you, this story is going to hit you right in the chest. Trust me, the payoff is worth every single minute. I need to start this story 8 years ago, when my father, Thomas, first started showing signs of the illness that would eventually take his life. Dad was 67 then, a successful real estate developer who'd built our family's wealth from absolutely nothing. Mom Linda had passed away when I was 22, and since then, it had been just Dad, my older brother Adam, and me navigating this world together. Adam was always Dad's golden boy. At 38, he was everything my father wanted in a son, charming, social, and completely convinced that his birthright included inheriting the family business. He worked for Dad's company, Thomas Development, in what could generously be called a consulting role. In reality, Adam spent most of his time playing golf with clients and taking long lunches while Dad and I handled the actual work. See, I was the one who'd been Dad's right hand for over a decade. After graduating with degrees in both business and law, I joined Thomas Development as the chief financial officer. I knew every contract, every property, every investment like they were my own children. While Adam was schmoozing clients, I was up at 5 a.m. reviewing construction reports and staying until midnight to negotiate deals. Dad noticed. How could he not? But families like ours have complicated dynamics around inheritance and gender roles. In public, Dad would praise Adam as his successor. In private, he'd turn to me for every major decision. Justine, he'd say, pulling me aside after another one of Adam's expensive mistakes, you understand this business better than anyone. But you know how things are. I did know how things were. And I accepted it, mostly because I loved my father and understood the pressure he felt to maintain certain appearances. That acceptance was about to pay off in ways my family never saw coming. When Dad's diagnosis came, pancreatic cancer, stage 3, everything shifted. The doctors gave him 18 months, maybe 2 years with aggressive treatment. Dad chose treatment, but he also chose to get his affairs in order. Adam immediately started circling like a vulture. Suddenly, he was interested in every aspect of the business, asking probing questions about property values and cash flow. He began scheduling weekly dinners with Dad, just the two of them, claiming he wanted to prepare for his future responsibilities. I watched this happening with a mixture of heartbreak and rage. Here was my brother, who'd barely shown up for work half the time, now positioning himself as the devoted son ready to carry on Dad's legacy. Meanwhile, I continued running the actual business while Dad underwent chemotherapy. 6 months into Dad's treatment, Adam made his first real move. He came to Dad with a proposal to modernize the company structure, suggesting they bring in outside consultants to optimize operations. What he was really proposing was pushing me out of my leadership role and consolidating power under his control. Dad, Adam said during one of our family dinners, his voice dripping with fake concern, Justine's been carrying too much responsibility. She looks exhausted. Maybe it's time she focused on finding a nice husband and starting a family instead of burning herself out with all this business stress. I nearly choked on my wine. Excuse me? Adam continued, not even looking at me. I'm just saying, Dad, you've always wanted grandchildren. Justine's 32 now. Her biological clock is ticking. The patronizing tone, the casual dismissal of my career, the assumption that my value lay in my reproductive potential, It took every ounce of self-control not to throw my wine glass at his smug face. Dad looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Adam and me. Justine's contribution to this company has been invaluable, he said carefully. Any future decisions will consider everyone's best interests. Adam smiled, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Of course, Dad. Family comes first. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, replaying every word of that dinner conversation. Adam wasn't just positioning himself to inherit the business, he was actively working to eliminate me from it entirely. And the most infuriating part was how he was using Dad's traditional values and health concerns as weapons against me. I decided to take action, but not in the way anyone expected. The next morning, I scheduled a private meeting with Dad at his favorite coffee shop, a little place near the office where we'd had countless business discussions over the years. Dad looked frail that day, the chemotherapy stealing his color and energy, but his mind was still sharp. Dad, I began carefully, I want to talk to you about something important. Not as your daughter, but as someone who cares deeply about your legacy. He raised an eyebrow, sipping his coffee slowly. Go on. I'm worried about Adam, I said. I'm worried about what happens to everything you've built if he's not ready for the responsibility. Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the busy street. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You think I don't see what's happening? I think you're in an impossible position, I replied. And I think I might have a solution. What I proposed to my father that day was unprecedented in our family. I suggested he create a trust structure that would protect the business and our family's assets while ensuring competent management regardless of what happened in the immediate future. I offered to research the legal framework and present him with options that would honor his wishes while safeguarding everything he'd worked for. Dad listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for several minutes. You'd be willing to do this even if it means complications with Adam? I met his eyes directly. Dad, I'd rather preserve your legacy than protect Adam's feelings. That was the beginning of our secret collaboration. Over the next 3 months, while Adam continued his performance as the devoted heir apparent, Dad and I worked with his estate attorney to create something remarkable, a comprehensive trust structure that would protect Thomas' development and our family's assets for generations. But here's the part that still gives me chills when I think about it. Dad didn't just create a trust. He created a trap. The legal documents were masterfully crafted. On the surface, Adam would inherit controlling interest in Thomas' development, just as he expected. But buried deep in the trust language were conditions and oversight provisions that essentially made him a figurehead. The real power, the real control, would rest with the trustee. And Dad named me as the successor trustee, with full authority to make decisions about distributions, business operations, and asset management. Adam had no idea. None of them did. Dad's condition worsened rapidly that winter. By March, he was spending more time in the hospital than at home. Adam's attentiveness increased proportionally. He was at the hospital every day, bringing Dad his favorite foods, arranging for private rooms, and making sure every nurse knew he was the devoted eldest son. I continued managing the business, now handling virtually everything while Dad fought his battle with cancer. The stress was enormous, but I was fueled by something greater than exhaustion. The knowledge that everything Adam was doing, every manipulation and power play, was ultimately pointless. Dad passed away on a rainy Thursday morning in April. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, while Adam was in the hospital cafeteria taking a phone call he claimed was urgent business. Even in death, our father received a perfect illustration of who had truly been there for him. The funeral was everything you'd expect from a successful businessman's memorial. Hundreds of people attended, sharing stories about Dad's generosity, his business acumen, and his dedication to family. Adam played the grieving eldest son perfectly, giving a beautiful eulogy about carrying on Dad's legacy and honoring his memory through continued success. I spoke too, keeping my remarks brief and focusing on Dad's values rather than his business achievements. But as I looked out at the crowd, seeing employees who'd worked for our family for decades, business partners who'd trusted Dad's word above contracts, and community members whose lives he'd touched, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. These people were counting on Adam to be the leader Dad had been. They had no idea what was coming. The will reading took place the following week in the conference room of Dad's law firm. Present were Adam, myself, our sister Natalie, and several key employees who'd been mentioned in smaller bequests. The atmosphere was somber but businesslike, everyone understanding this was simply a formal procedure to confirm what everyone already knew. Attorney James Morrison had been Dad's lawyer for over 20 years. He'd helped structure some of Thomas Development's biggest deals and had known our family since Adam and I were teenagers. He began by reading the smaller bequests, generous gifts to longtime employees, charitable donations to causes Dad had supported, and a substantial inheritance for Natalie. Then came the main event. To my son, Adam, Morrison read, his voice carrying the weight of legal formality, I leave controlling interest in Thomas Development Corporation, including all subsidiary companies, current development projects, and associated assets. I trust he will honor our family's commitment to excellence and continue building on the foundation I have established. Adam closed his eyes, letting out a long breath he'd apparently been holding. Around the table, people nodded approvingly. This was exactly what everyone had expected. To my daughter, Justine, Morrison continued, I leave my personal residence, my art collection, and my investment portfolio, with the knowledge that she has always understood the true value of our family's legacy. I nodded gracefully, accepting what appeared to be a generous but secondary inheritance. On paper, Adam had received the company worth millions, while I'd inherited personal assets worth perhaps a tenth of that amount. Adam reached over and squeezed my hand, his gesture intended to appear comforting but feeling distinctly condescending. Dad took good care of both of us, he said softly. We'll make sure his legacy continues. I smiled and squeezed back. I'm sure we will. What happened next was pure theater, and I was about to deliver the performance of my lifetime. After the formal reading, people began to leave, offering their condolences and congratulations to Adam. Within an hour, it was just Adam, myself, and Attorney Morrison in the conference room. There are some additional documents we need to review, Morrison said, pulling out a thick folder I recognized immediately. Your father established a comprehensive trust structure to manage the business assets and ensure long-term stability. Adam waved his hand dismissively. Sure. Whatever Dad set up, I'm sure it's fine. Just standard estate planning stuff, right? Morrison exchanged a glance with me, and I could see the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Well, Mr. Adam, it's a bit more complex than that. Perhaps we should review the trust documents in detail. For the next hour, Morrison walked Adam through the trust structure Dad had created. I watched my brother's expression change as the reality became clear. Yes, he technically owned controlling interest in Thomas Development. But that ownership was held in trust, with distributions and business decisions subject to trustee approval. Okay, Adam said, still not grasping the full picture, so there's a trustee. That's fine. Probably some bank or trust company, right? Professional management, very standard. Morrison looked at him carefully. Actually, your father named a successor trustee. Someone he felt would understand his vision and make decisions aligned with his values. Adam nodded confidently. Great. Who is it? Morrison looked directly at me. Justine. The silence in that conference room was deafening. I watched the blood drain from Adam's face as the implications crashed over him like a tidal wave. He looked at the documents, then at Morrison, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. That's not possible," he stammered. "Justine inherited the house and some investments. I inherited the business." "You inherited beneficial interest in the business," Morrison corrected patiently. "But the trust structure gives the trustee, Justine, authority over all major business decisions, distributions, and operational matters." Adam's voice rose to almost a shout. "What does that mean exactly?" I spoke for the first time since the trust documents had been introduced, my voice calm and steady. "It means, dear brother, that while you may technically own the company, I control it." The next few minutes were chaos. Adam demanded explanations, threatened legal challenges, and accused me of manipulating Dad while he was sick. He insisted there had been some mistake, that Dad would never have structured things this way. Morrison remained professional throughout Adam's tantrum, calmly explaining that the trust documents had been reviewed multiple times, signed in the presence of witnesses, and were legally ironclad. Dad had been of sound mind throughout the entire process, and had made his intentions crystal clear. But why would he do this? Adam demanded, finally deflating into his chair. "I'm the eldest son. I was supposed to inherit everything." I stood up, gathering my copies of the trust documents. "Adam, do you remember what you said at dinner 6 months ago? About how I should stop focusing on business stress and start focusing on finding a husband and having babies?" Adam looked confused. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Dad heard you. He heard you dismiss my decade of work, my expertise, my dedication to this company. He heard you reduce my value to my reproductive potential." My voice was getting stronger, fed by years of suppressed anger. "And he decided that someone who couldn't recognize my contributions wasn't qualified to manage his life's work." The truth was even more complex than that, but Adam didn't need to know about all the late-night conversations Dad and I had shared, or the detailed succession planning we'd done together. He didn't need to know that Dad had been testing him for months, watching his priorities and decision-making, and finding him lacking. "This isn't over," Adam said, standing abruptly. "I'll contest this. I'll prove Dad wasn't thinking clearly. Cancer patients on medication can't make rational decisions about something this important." Morrison spoke calmly. "Mr. Adam, your father underwent cognitive evaluations before signing these documents. He was examined by 2 independent physicians who confirmed his mental capacity. Additionally, these trust structures were developed over several months, with multiple opportunities for revision. Your father was quite deliberate in his choices." I could see Adam calculating, trying to figure out his next move. "Fine," he said finally. "But you can't run this company without me. I know the clients, the relationships, the deals in progress. You'll need my cooperation." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment to deliver the final blow. "Actually, Adam, I won't need your cooperation at all." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "You see, while you were playing golf and taking long lunches this past year, I wasn't just managing day-to-day operations. I was preparing for this transition." I spread the documents across the conference table like a winning poker hand. "Here are signed contracts with all our major clients, explicitly naming me as the primary point of contact for ongoing projects. Here are agreements with our key subcontractors, ensuring continuity regardless of ownership changes. And here, I placed the final document down with a flourish, is a comprehensive business plan for the next 5 years, already approved by our board of directors." Adam stared at the papers, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing rage. "You planned this. You manipulated Dad into giving you control. I prepared for the future of this company, I corrected. Something you should have been doing instead of assuming your inheritance was guaranteed. Morrison began packing up his files, clearly eager to escape the family drama that was about to explode. If there are no further legal questions, I'll leave you both to work out the operational details. After Morrison left, Adam and I faced each other across the conference table. The corporate politeness had evaporated, leaving raw sibling rivalry and years of accumulated resentment. You can't do this to me, Adam said, his voice desperate now rather than angry. I'm your brother. Dad wanted me to run this company. Did he? I asked quietly. Because every major decision for the past 2 years came through me. Every crisis, every opportunity, every strategic choice, Dad asked for my input, not yours. Adam slammed his hand on the table. Because you manipulated him. You were there every day, poisoning him against me. I was there every day because that's what running a business requires, I shot back. Where were you when the Peterson deal was falling apart? Getting a massage at the country club. Where were you when the city planning committee tried to block our downtown project? On vacation in Hawaii. Where were you when Dad was throwing up from chemotherapy? Taking important phone calls in the hospital cafeteria. Each accusation hit Adam like a physical blow. He knew I was right, but knowing and accepting are different things. So what happens now? He asked, his fight deflating into resignation. I softened my tone slightly. Despite everything, he was still my brother, and I wasn't a monster. Now you have a choice. You can work with me to build this company into something even greater than Dad imagined, or you can fight me and watch your inheritance disappear in legal fees. Work with you how? You keep your position as Director of Client Relations. It's what you're actually good at, the schmoozing, the relationship building, the public face of Thomas development. But the strategic decisions, the financial management, the operational oversight, that's my domain. Adam was quiet for several long minutes, staring at the trust documents spread across the table. And if I refuse? The trust gives me authority to remove any family member from company employment if their actions are detrimental to business operations. Fighting this publicly would definitely qualify as detrimental. It was a bluff, mostly. The trust language was more nuanced than I was suggesting, and any employment decisions would require careful documentation. But Adam didn't know that, and I was counting on his ignorance of legal details. I need time to think, he said finally. Take all the time you need, I replied, standing to leave. But the board meeting is scheduled for Monday morning. I'll be presenting the transition plan and introducing myself as the new CEO. Adam looked up sharply. CEO? The trust makes you CEO? I smiled, and for the first time since this whole conversation started, it was genuine. No, Adam. The board of directors makes me CEO. The trust just gives me the authority to accept the position. That weekend was the longest 48 hours of my life. I knew Adam was making phone calls, trying to figure out his options, possibly consulting with other attorneys about challenging the trust. I spent the time preparing for the board meeting, reviewing every detail of my transition plan, and mentally rehearsing the presentation that would officially mark my takeover of Thomas Development. Monday morning arrived with typical Seattle rain, gray skies matching the somber mood in the Thomas Development conference room. Our board of directors consisted of 6 people, myself, Adam, 2 longtime business partners of Dad's, our head of construction operations, and our chief financial advisor. I'd already spoken privately with each of the non-family board members, explaining the trust structure and my plans for the company's future. Their support was crucial, not just for the CEO appointment, but for the legitimacy of my leadership. Adam arrived 5 minutes late, looking like he hadn't slept much over the weekend. He took his seat without making eye contact with me, his usual confident demeanor replaced with something that resembled defeat. "Thank you all for being here during this difficult transition period," I began, standing at the head of the conference table where Dad had presided over hundreds of meetings. "As you know, my father's passing has created both challenges and opportunities for Thomas Development." I outlined the trust structure briefly, emphasizing how it provided stability and continuity during the ownership transition. Then I presented my vision for the company's future: sustainable development projects, expanded community engagement, and a focus on long-term value creation rather than quick profits. "The board needs to make several important decisions today," I continued, "including the appointment of a new CEO to guide the company through this transition and beyond." Board member Robert Kim, one of Dad's oldest friends, spoke first. "Justine, your presentation demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking Thomas Development needs. I motion to appoint you as Chief Executive Officer." The motion was seconded immediately by our construction head, Maria Santos. When the vote was called, it was unanimous, with Adam abstaining rather than voting against me. The appointment was official. I was now CEO of Thomas Development, with full authority to make operational decisions and guide the company's direction. Adam remained on the board and in his client relations role, but under my leadership. After the meeting, as board members offered their congratulations and discussed implementation timelines, Adam approached me. "You win," he said quietly. "But don't expect me to be happy about it." "I don't expect you to be happy," I replied. "I expect you to be professional." Over the following weeks, I implemented changes throughout Thomas Development with surgical precision. Adam's role was redefined to focus exclusively on client relations and business development, areas where his social skills were genuinely valuable. However, his authority to make financial commitments or operational decisions was eliminated entirely. The transition wasn't without its challenges. Some longtime clients were surprised by the leadership change, and a few required personal meetings to ensure their continued confidence in our services. But Dad had built Thomas Development on a foundation of competence and reliability, and I was determined to honor that legacy. Adam adapted to his reduced role with varying degrees of grace. Some days he seemed genuinely engaged with his client responsibilities, using his natural charm to strengthen relationships and identify new opportunities. Other days, his resentment was palpable, creating tension during staff meetings and client presentations. 3 months after taking over as CEO, I made a decision that would fundamentally change our family dynamic forever. Thomas Development had been working on a major mixed-use development project downtown, something Dad had been passionate about before his illness. The project had been stalled for months due to financing complications and city approval processes. As the new CEO, resolving this issue became my top priority. After weeks of negotiations, I successfully secured both the necessary financing and final city approvals. The project was worth over $50 million and would establish Thomas Development as a major player in Seattle's commercial development scene. The success should have been celebrated by everyone involved. Instead, it became the catalyst for our family's final confrontation. The day after announcing the project's approval, Adam requested a private meeting in my office. His demeanor was different, not the resigned acceptance he'd shown over recent months, but something harder and more determined. "I've been talking to some people," he began, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Lawyers, business advisors, people who understand complicated family situations." I leaned back in my chair, maintaining eye contact. "And what did these people tell you?" "They told me that trusts can be challenged successfully, especially when there's evidence of undue influence or coercion." Adam's voice was gaining confidence as he spoke. They told me that a dying man making dramatic changes to his estate plans while on cancer medication raises serious questions about his mental capacity. Adam, I said calmly, we've been through this. Dad was evaluated by multiple physicians. His mental capacity was thoroughly documented. But that was months ago, Adam pressed on. I'm talking about the specific time period when he made the final changes to the trust structure. The weeks right before he died, when he was heavily medicated and experiencing significant pain. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Adam had clearly done his homework this time, and he was raising issues that could potentially create legal complications, even if they ultimately failed. What exactly are you suggesting? Adam leaned forward, his eyes intense. I'm suggesting that we renegotiate this arrangement. Give me real authority in the company, not just client relations, but operational decision-making. Make me co-CEO, with equal authority to yours. And if I refuse? Then I contest the trust in court. I present evidence that Dad wasn't thinking clearly during his final weeks. I argue that his decisions were influenced by pain medication and the undue influence of a manipulative daughter who took advantage of his vulnerable state. The accusations stung, partly because they contained just enough truth to be dangerous. Dad had been on pain medication during our final planning sessions. He had been vulnerable and dependent on others for support. A skilled attorney could potentially craft those facts into a compelling narrative of exploitation. But Adam had made a critical error in his calculation. He assumed I would be afraid of public scrutiny, afraid of having our family's private business exposed in court proceedings. He assumed I would choose compromise over conflict. He was wrong. Adam, I said, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked downtown Seattle. Do you remember the conversation we had after the board meeting? When I told you I expected you to be professional? What does that have to do with anything? I turned back to face him, and something in my expression must have warned him that this conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. It has everything to do with this moment. Because threatening to drag our family through a public legal battle, accusing me of elder abuse, and attempting to extort me into giving you power you haven't earned, none of that qualifies as professional behavior. Adam's confident demeanor flickered slightly. I'm not extorting anyone. I'm trying to correct an injustice. Are you? I walked back to my desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a thick file folder I'd hoped never to use. Because I have a different perspective on what constitutes injustice in this family. I placed the folder on the desk between us. Adam glanced at it nervously, clearly wondering what it contained. This folder contains documentation of every questionable business decision you've made over the past 5 years, I began, my voice taking on the cold professionalism I used during difficult client negotiations. Every expense report that couldn't quite be justified. Every client dinner that cost more than reasonable. Every instance where company resources were used for personal benefit. Adam's face went pale. You had me investigated? I had our books audited, I corrected. Thoroughly. Multiple times. Dad knew about most of these issues, but he chose to handle them privately rather than involve outside authorities. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Here's your expense report from March of last year. A weekend trip to Las Vegas, charged to the company as client development, except our records show no clients were present and no business was conducted. Adam started to speak, but I held up my hand to stop him. Here's another interesting one. Last summer's consulting fee paid to your friend Jason's marketing company for services that were never actually provided. $8,000, Adam. For a marketing plan that was never delivered. I could see sweat beginning to form on Adam's forehead as I continued pulling documents from the file. And my personal favorite, I said, placing a final document on the desk with deliberate precision. The company credit card charges for home improvements to your condo. $15,000 in construction materials and contractor fees, all charged to Thomas Development and categorized as office improvements. Adam was completely silent now, staring at the evidence of his financial impropriety spread across my desk. The confident negotiator who'd walked into my office had disappeared, replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened. Now, I continued, gathering the documents back into their folder, let's talk about what constitutes undue influence and questionable behavior. Because I'm fairly certain that embezzling company funds and filing fraudulent expense reports creates a much more compelling legal narrative than your theories about Dad's medication affecting his judgment. When Adam finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. What do you want? I want you to withdraw any threat of legal action against the trust, I said simply. I want you to commit to fulfilling your current role professionally and ethically. And I want your guarantee that we'll never have this conversation again. And if I agree? Then this file stays in my desk drawer, and we continue working together as family members and business partners. Your past mistakes remain private, and your future with Thomas Development remains secure. Adam stared at the desk for several long minutes, processing his options. When he finally looked up, the fight had gone out of him completely. I agree, he said quietly. I need to hear you say it clearly, Adam. All of it. He took a deep breath. I withdraw any threat of legal action against Dad's trust. I commit to fulfilling my current role professionally. And I guarantee we'll never have this conversation again. I nodded, placing the file back in my desk drawer. Good. Now, we have a client presentation tomorrow morning for the Morrison account. I'll need you to review the proposal and prepare your relationship summary. Adam stood to leave, then paused at the door. Justine? Yes? Did Dad know about all of this? He gestured vaguely toward my desk drawer. I met his eyes directly. Dad knew about everything, Adam. Everything. After Adam left, I sat alone in my office as the afternoon light faded over Seattle. The confrontation had been more emotionally draining than I'd expected, but it had also been necessary. Adam needed to understand that his position in the family and the company wasn't guaranteed by birthright, it was earned through competence and integrity. The truth was, I'd never wanted to use the information in that file. Dad and I had discussed Adam's financial indiscretions at length, and Dad had always preferred handling family problems privately rather than involving outside authorities or damaging relationships permanently. But when Adam chose to threaten the trust structure that Dad had so carefully crafted, when he chose to accuse me of manipulation and elder abuse, he crossed a line that required a definitive response. The weeks following our confrontation brought a remarkable change in family dynamics. Adam threw himself into his client relations work with genuine enthusiasm, perhaps motivated by gratitude for my discretion or perhaps simply relieved to have a clearly defined role that played to his strengths. Our working relationship improved dramatically. Without the underlying tension of power struggles and inheritance disputes, we were able to collaborate effectively on business development and client service. Adam's natural charm and social skills complemented my analytical approach to business strategy, creating a partnership that Dad would have been proud to see. 6 months after our confrontation, Thomas Development completed the downtown mixed-use project that had been Dad's final passion. The grand opening was attended by city officials, business leaders, and community members who would benefit from the affordable housing and retail spaces we'd created. Standing in the plaza that evening, watching families explore their new community space while local musicians performed on the small stage we'd incorporated into the design, I felt Dad's presence more strongly than I had since his funeral. Adam approached me as the event was winding down, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. To Dad, he said simply, offering me a glass. To Dad, I agreed, clinking my glass against his. We stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the last visitors explore the plaza. Finally, Adam spoke. You know, I spent so many years being angry about not being enough for him, he said quietly. Not smart enough, not driven enough, not serious enough about the business. I looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. But watching you lead this company, seeing what you've accomplished, I think I finally understand what Dad saw in you. And I think I understand why he structured things the way he did. Adam. Let me finish, he said, holding up his hand. I was wrong to challenge you. Wrong to threaten the trust. Wrong to assume that being the eldest son automatically made me the right choice to lead this company. He paused, taking a sip of champagne before continuing. But I'm grateful you handled it the way you did. You could have destroyed me with that information. You could have had me arrested, sued me, ruined my reputation permanently. Instead, you gave me a chance to be better. I felt tears forming in my eyes, unexpected emotion triggered by hearing my brother finally acknowledge the dynamics that had shaped our family for so many years. We're family, Adam, I said softly. That has to mean something, even when we disappoint each other. The grand opening celebration became a turning point for both of us personally and professionally. In the months that followed, Thomas' development flourished under our collaborative leadership. My strategic vision combined with Adam's relationship-building skills created opportunities that neither of us could have achieved alone. More importantly, we rebuilt our relationship as siblings. Not the competitive, resentful dynamic that had characterized our adult years, but something healthier and more genuine. We had monthly dinners together, not to discuss business but to maintain our connection as family members. Adam even started dating someone seriously, a teacher named Emma whom he'd met through one of our community development projects. Their relationship seemed to ground him in ways his previous romantic involvements hadn't, giving him perspective on life beyond business and social status. 1 year after Dad's death, I made an announcement that surprised everyone, including myself. During our annual board meeting, I proposed restructuring Adam's role to include genuine operational authority in specific areas where his skills and interests aligned with company needs. Not co-CEO status, but real decision-making power in business development and community relations. Adam has demonstrated consistent professionalism and genuine commitment to Dad's vision, I told the board. He's earned the opportunity to take on greater responsibility. The board approved the restructuring unanimously, and Adam accepted his expanded role with gratitude rather than entitlement. The change represented something neither of us had expected when this journey began, a family business structure based on merit and collaboration rather than tradition and assumptions. 2 years after Dad's death, Thomas' development was thriving beyond anything he could have imagined. We'd completed 6 major projects, employed over 200 people, and established a foundation for affordable housing development that was becoming a model for other cities. Adam and Emma announced their engagement, and for the first time in years, our family celebration was genuinely joyful rather than performative. Watching my brother with someone who clearly loved him for who he was rather than what he represented made me realize how much we'd all grown since Dad's passing. The engagement party was held at the downtown plaza we'd developed, with the community space filled with family, friends, and colleagues. During his speech, Adam acknowledged both Dad's influence and my leadership in making their happiness possible. My father taught me that family and business success aren't separate goals, he said, raising his glass to the crowd. And my sister taught me that earning both requires more than just showing up. Later that evening, as Emma and I helped clean up after the party, she pulled me aside for a private conversation. I want to thank you, she said, her voice serious despite the celebratory atmosphere. For what? For believing Adam could be better than he was. He's told me about everything, the inheritance issues, the confrontation in your office, the chance you gave him to prove himself. I was surprised Adam had shared those details, but also pleased that he felt comfortable being completely honest with his partner. He did the work, Emma. I just provided the opportunity. Maybe, she said with a smile, but not everyone would have made that choice. You could have destroyed him when he threatened you. Instead, you saved him. That night, lying in bed in the house Dad had left me, the house that had become truly mine through 2 years of renovations and personal touches, I reflected on the journey that had brought our family to this point. Adam's attempt to challenge the trust and steal control of the company had backfired completely, but in a way that ultimately strengthened our family rather than destroying it. His threats had forced me to reveal the extent of his financial impropriety, but that revelation had also created an opportunity for accountability and growth. The revenge I'd served him wasn't the kind you see in movies, no public humiliation, no dramatic courtroom scenes, no relationships permanently destroyed. Instead, it was something more subtle and ultimately more satisfying, the complete reversal of power dynamics combined with the opportunity for redemption. Adam had learned that threatening me was not only futile but counterproductive. I had demonstrated that my position as trustee and CEO wasn't just about Dad's favoritism, it was about competence, preparation, and genuine commitment to the family legacy. But more than that, we'd both learned that family relationships can survive even serious betrayals if there's genuine willingness to change and grow. 3 years after Dad's death, I received a call that brought our story full circle in the most unexpected way. The caller was Attorney Morrison, Dad's longtime lawyer, with news that initially confused me. Justine, I've been contacted by a journalist who's researching family business succession stories. Apparently, word has gotten out about the trust structure your father created and how successfully you've managed the transition. I was immediately concerned about our family's private business becoming public, but Morrison continued with more intriguing information. The journalist isn't interested in publishing anything sensational. She's writing a business article about innovative estate planning and family business continuity. Your father's approach is being studied by estate attorneys as a model for preventing family conflicts while ensuring competent leadership. The idea that Dad's legal strategy was influencing other families felt like a validation of everything we'd been through. But Morrison had more news. There's something else, Justine. Something your father asked me to give you on the 3rd anniversary of his death. What kind of something? A letter. He wrote it shortly after you two finished creating the trust structure, but instructed me not to deliver it until you'd had sufficient time to prove the system worked. My hands were shaking as I drove to Morrison's office that afternoon. 3 years had passed since Dad's death, but the prospect of receiving a final message from him brought all my grief rushing back to the surface. Morrison handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 6 months before his death, during the time when we were finalizing the trust documents. My dearest Justine, the letter began, if you are reading this, it means 3 years have passed since my death and Attorney Morrison has determined that you have successfully implemented our succession plan. I am writing this knowing I may not live to see the results of our work, but confident that you will honor both the letter and spirit of what we have created together. I had to stop reading for several minutes, overwhelmed by hearing Dad's voice again through his written words. I want you to understand that every decision I made about the trust was based on my observations of your character, your competence, and your commitment to our family's values. Your brother Adam is a good man with many admirable qualities, but leadership requires more than good intentions. It requires the ability to make difficult decisions, to prioritize long-term success over short-term comfort, and to put the welfare of others above personal desires. The letter continued for 2 pages, detailing Dad's thoughts about leadership, family dynamics, and his hopes for Thomas' development's future. But the final paragraph was what brought me to tears. I suspect Adam may challenge our arrangements initially. His pride and traditional expectations about inheritance will make acceptance difficult. But I believe you will handle any conflicts with wisdom and compassion. You have always understood that true strength lies not in wielding power over others, but in using power to lift others up. If Adam proves willing to grow and contribute meaningfully to our family's legacy, I trust you will create opportunities for him to do so. The goal was never to punish him, but to ensure that leadership is earned rather than inherited. I drove home that evening with Dad's letter on the passenger seat, his final validation of every choice I'd made over the past 3 years. The trust hadn't just protected Thomas' development from Adam's potential mismanagement, it had created a framework for both of us to become better versions of ourselves. That weekend, I showed the letter to Adam. We were having our monthly dinner at a restaurant downtown, and after we'd finished discussing business matters and family news, I pulled out Dad's letter. "I want to share something with you," I said, placing the envelope on the table between us. Adam read the letter slowly, his expression changing as he absorbed Dad's words. When he finished, he was quiet for several long minutes. "He really did plan all of this, didn't he?" Adam said finally. "Not just the legal structure, but everything that happened afterward." "I think he hoped we'd both learn from the experience," I replied. "And I think he believed we were capable of becoming the family he wanted us to be." Adam folded the letter carefully and handed it back to me. "You know what the strangest part is? I'm grateful it happened this way. If Dad had just left me in charge from the beginning, I probably would have made terrible decisions and destroyed everything he built." "You might have surprised yourself," I said gently. "No," Adam shook his head. "I wasn't ready then. I'm barely ready now, even with all the learning I've done over the past 3 years." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both processing the revelation that Dad had anticipated not just our conflicts, but our eventual resolution. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out a document I'd prepared before our dinner. "I've been working with Morrison on some modifications to the trust structure." Adam looked alarmed. "What kind of modifications?" "The kind that reflect how much you've grown over the past 3 years, I replied, sliding the document across the table. "I'm proposing to expand your authority within the company and modify the succession plan to include provisions for your future leadership development." Adam stared at the document without opening it. "Why would you do that?" "Because Dad was right about both of us. You needed time to prove yourself, and I needed to demonstrate that power should be used to build people up rather than tear them down." When Adam finally opened the document and read through the proposed changes, his eyes filled with tears. The modifications would give him genuine authority in business development and community relations, while also creating a pathway for him to potentially assume greater leadership responsibilities as he continued developing his skills. "This is more than I ever expected," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's what you've earned," I replied simply. The legal modifications were finalized 2 months later, creating a more balanced leadership structure that honored both Dad's original vision and the growth we'd both experienced. Thomas Development continued to thrive under our collaborative management, becoming one of Seattle's most respected development companies. Adam and Emma married the following spring in a ceremony held at the community plaza we'd built together. Dad would have loved seeing his children celebrating in the space that represented everything he'd valued about family, business, and community service. During the reception, Adam gave a speech that brought the entire story full circle. 3 years ago, I thought I deserved to inherit my father's business simply because I was his eldest son, he began, looking out at the crowd of family, friends, and colleagues. I was angry when I learned that wasn't how inheritance works in our family. But today, I understand that the greatest inheritance isn't what you receive, it's what you become worthy of receiving. He looked directly at me during the next part of his speech. My sister taught me that leadership isn't about title or authority. It's about competence, integrity, and the willingness to put others' welfare ahead of your own comfort. She could have destroyed me when I challenged her, but instead she gave me the chance to become someone worthy of being her partner. The applause was thunderous, but I was barely aware of it. I was thinking about Dad, wishing he could see how his careful planning had created not just business success, but genuine family healing. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Emma approached me with a small wrapped gift. "This is from Adam and me," she said, "but also kind of from your dad." Inside the box was a beautiful silver picture frame containing a photo I'd never seen before. It showed Dad, Adam, and me at the construction site of one of our early projects, all three of us wearing hard hats and smiling despite being covered in dust. "Adam found it in your dad's desk when we were cleaning out his home office," Emma explained. "He'd written something on the back." I turned the frame over and found Dad's handwriting, "My greatest development project, building a family business that builds character." Standing there in the plaza filled with friends and family, holding that photo and thinking about everything we'd been through, I finally understood the full scope of what Dad had accomplished. He hadn't just created a trust to protect his business assets. He'd created a system that would force his children to become worthy of his legacy. The revenge I'd served Adam by revealing his financial impropriety and demonstrating my superior competence had been satisfying in the moment. But the real victory was what came afterward, the opportunity to transform our relationship from competitive rivalry into collaborative partnership. Dad's trust hadn't just made me the powerful one in our family dynamic. It had given both Adam and me the chance to become better people than we'd been when he was alive. 5 years after Dad's death, Thomas Development was featured on the cover of Seattle Business Magazine as Family Business of the Year. The article highlighted our innovative approach to community development and our collaborative leadership model. But the quote that made me proudest came from Adam: "Success in family business isn't about who inherits what. It's about whether the next generation can honor the previous generation's values while building something even better for the future." Reading those words, I knew Dad would have been satisfied with his investment in both of us. The most beautiful part of this entire story isn't that I got revenge on Adam, it's that the revenge became the foundation for something better than either of us could have achieved alone. When Adam threatened to destroy the trust structure Dad had carefully created, he had no idea he was walking into a trap that had been set not just by Dad's legal documents, but by years of his own poor decisions. The moment I opened that file and showed him evidence of his financial impropriety, I watched 10 years of entitled assumptions crumble in real time. This was a man who'd spent his entire adult life assuming his inheritance was guaranteed, that his position in the family gave him immunity from consequences. But the real revenge wasn't humiliating him, it was giving him the chance to earn what he'd always assumed was his by right. Every successful project we completed together, every client relationship he built through actual competence rather than family connections, every moment of genuine collaboration between us was proof that Dad's plan had worked perfectly. Adam thought he was fighting for control of the company. What he was actually fighting for was the opportunity to become worthy of that control. Looking back now, I realized Dad didn't just create a trust, he created a masterpiece of family psychology. He knew exactly how Adam would react, exactly how I would respond, and exactly what we'd both need to learn to become the leaders he wanted us to be. Have you ever had a family member underestimate you, or try to take something that was rightfully yours? Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's giving people exactly what they think they want and watching them discover what they actually need. Drop your story in the comments below, hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed this journey, and remember, the most satisfying victories are the ones that lift everyone up in the end.